Welcome to the Petrichor Marching Arts Podcast, where we talk all things marching arts. My name's Bryson Teel. I'm a songwriter, composer, and mixing engineer, teaching and designing for drum corps, marching bands, and indoor percussion groups on the East Coast, as well as my mainstay school, Newtown High School in Connecticut. I'm sitting down with performers, educators, and creators to discuss perspectives on the activity, to see where it's at now and where it's headed in the future. On today's episode, I'll be talking about composition, mainly in WGI marching percussion, from a modern sound designer's perspective. All right, everyone. Thanks for coming. This is the first episode of the Petrichor Arts Podcast. I've been meaning to do this for a long time now. I've had the gear. I mean, it's readily available. So it was just a matter of time. I think a couple things to preface everything I'm about to say here. I've actually inserted this here so I can clarify some things. I kind of go on a bit of a tangent. But when I say sound design, it's really not an accurate term for what these electronics composers and stuff do in ensembles. There are times where these marching sound designers will create sounds from scratch, which is what you would more likely consider a sound designer to be if you're familiar with film or anything like that. A lot of the time we're just literally composing with different sounds and effects and compiling them and then using them in a certain way. Same way that you'd use instruments and write a piece, clarinets or what have you, to make a greater picture. And then another detail, I do say abstract in here a few times, and I don't mean it necessarily from the standpoint of abstract meaning absent of meaning or not really relating anything, is just being strange to be strange. I mean it more so in that it's a little off the beaten path from what we're used to. So when I say that, just know that's what I mean. But to start off, what do people think of when they hear the term sound design used in the marching context? I think probably a popular idea would be, for example, if there was a WGI show about water. Audience members may expect to hear sounds that have some kind of relationship to water. And understandably so. It does make sense. And, there's the stuff beyond that point, things that enhance, things that are happening in the front ensemble. For example, if you had a reverse metal hit into a crotale, things that kind of just bring alive what's happening on the floor. Representing what's happening visually, kind of bringing the package together. And from my perspective, this is really just scratching the surface of what is possible with all the tools that we have as sound designers and composers. And when I say that, I don't really mean kind of stuff people are doing with all the technology, all the physical technology and stuff like that. Kind of how Blue Coats were exploring the speakers on the field, how to integrate that, what MCM was doing this past season. I'm kind of talking more from purely a compositional standpoint and how the electronics can further composition in the activity. And the hard part about doing that is that it goes against a lot of norms. We have to essentially go into the realm of abstract. Now, you might be asking yourself, why would this make more sense and be able to go further in the abstract? Well, with all these tools that we have, we can go beyond just what we hear in the front ensemble with the keyboard instruments, even people speaking, singing, and the battery. What's hard about that is the activity feels more, not as cerebral in presentation. It feels more straightforward and physical, and a lot of people reward groups for that. That's just kind of how it's been. We're just kind of getting into this electronic age, and it's really only the beginning. Now, it's hard because people have different personalities. People like different things. When I talk about stuff moving forward, people might think of Broken City. And, advantage of Broken City, I mean, they're getting a lot of really high-level players, so they can achieve what they're doing. Sometimes when things are just played super well, people kind of look past the concept a little bit and are more willing to accept the ambiguity. But the big thing there is that, they're attracting not just the players, but the personalities that want to perform those shows. I could grab 10 kids. Be like, hey, how do you feel about Broken City show? I guarantee some of them will be like, I don't really like it. I kind of like that Ant show more. Some people like the physical, what they can see, what they can, what can be tangible to them. And some people like what's internal, what can be interpreted. For me, I'm that person, and you can have a type of person that could be in that group that's either kind of like a feeler or a thinker, kind of more logical versus feeling. I kind of fall into the feeling group. So my personality type, if you were to go by Myers-Briggs, which debatably is all BS, is INFP. And I lead with this function called introverted feeling. So essentially all my decisions and choices are based upon feeling, and I interpret the world in feeling. So when I look at something such as an abstract concept in performance, that's appealing to me. That's what I would want to perform. And most likely if someone gave me a water show, I wouldn't really connect to it. I wouldn't be into it. And, the same thing can be said vice versa. And there's this disconnect. And that's what's holding things back a little bit. Which is okay. Because we don't just need the cerebral stuff. We need variety in the activity. And it takes different personalities, different types of people to make different shows that appeal to all walks of life. Same thing as watching movies. There's a type of movie for everybody. And I feel that is also how the activity should be. And kind of to give like a external example of this outside of the activity, I'm a fan of horror movies. And one of my friends, she had a coworker who was also a fan. So she was talking to her coworker about the stuff I like. Stuff namely, recently like Hereditary. I love The Witch, Suspiria. And, her coworker was just like, oh, those are all stupid. Because, she was liking stuff more like The Conjuring, which I can understand why. But her opinion was more along the realm of kind of appreciating the roller coaster ride of it more than all these crazy abstract details and then the vibe that's being created. And that kind of shows you a clear disconnect, because both kind of realms are highly regarded, but for different reasons. And for the same reason I like the stuff I like, this person wouldn't like it. And that's kind of how I view the activity. If I'm watching a show, I know certain people are going to like this, I know certain people are going to like that. And that's why we see the 50-50 split in the judging community. And it makes sense. We're just continuing based off of what we're doing, kind of slowly introducing new stuff. I wouldn't say that WGI or GCI is in an unhealthy place at all. It's certainly moving forward. But, I'm kind of thinking more in the long term. And what's going to kind of lead to this long-term forward momentum is going to be when sound designers are leading the creation of productions, or kind of the program coordinators of the group they're working with. Because then, the opinion of the sound designer can sometimes matter just a little bit more than usual. We tend to be kind of in the background a bit. And it'll make it a lot easier, because if your program coordinator is a sound designer and we're trying to approach an abstract concept and they're very in touch with that stuff, they might be able to kind of, interpret for everybody else, what's going on in their head, so that everything just feels a little bit more comfortable when trying to approach that stuff. But, the position I'm in at Newtown High School is more or less that. I'm not literally, but we're kind of all in more of an equal playing field in terms of creating the show, more or less. But I do have people with me that trust what I do, and luckily understand what I do, which is gotta be like 1 in a million. Maybe not literally that statistic, but very uncommon. I I really don't know of many groups personally that are run by a sound designer type personality. And it's not just that, it's kind of the perfect storm of all that stuff, and also the sound designer being into that stuff as well. A sound designer can just be, again, a supportive role and still know how to write cool stuff that can be used for the show, but is used in a more of a standard way. You'd have to have that person that's really trying to just kind of ignore that and do something different. And then, then it just comes to the kids being into it, because, if they're not remotely into it, then it's just not going to happen because they won't be able to perform it or connect with it, blah, blah, blah. So yeah. It's going to be a while. But, I know it's not just me. I know there's other people popping up in other places. And it's going to be in high schools. A lot of this innovation is going to come from programs that are just, starting up new, because things change a lot in schools all over the country. Sometimes people are just going to strike gold. And at some point, those groups will be the next Chino Hills. It's going to happen. It takes time. Chino Hills, all those groups, weren't amazing just right out of the gate. They had to build those programs. Not just in the band itself with the parents, but also as individuals trying to run a program, trying to understand how to do that stuff correctly. Having the right personality to be the director. It's a whole thing. Going back to the catalyst of what's going to change everything, that's it. That's really it. Things aren't going to change if people aren't doing the stuff. We can talk about rules all we want, but until we have a bunch of people just saying screw it and just making these shows and doing them at a high level and more consistently, we might not see that change. But I'm sure we'll still, see naturally new implementations of electronics happening, for sure. And, speaking of the performance, what people get from it, I'm really, it sounds cliche, and everyone really says this, and you'll hear this at the top groups, but I really do not care so much about the scores. I view the activity more like songwriting. If I write a song, kind of my personal motto is, if really one person authentically feels the intended emotion being presented, then that song has succeeded. And if we're in the activity and we perform a show and someone is sincerely, authentically affected, what could be better than that? To me, that is amazing. We had judges and WGI officials coming to us like sobbing with my high school show this past season. And really that, to me and our students, that really meant a lot more than, the scores we received. I think semifinals we got 4th, and prelims we got 4th, semifinals we got like 18th. Both times we had this visceral reaction from people, and even as staff members watching the show. And that, again, not to sound too cheesy, to me is what it's all about. And I think you can say that same kind of idea with, again, not just abstract shows, but regular shows. But I think more emotional shows just lend themselves to more like sincere, deep, authentic emotions rather than just, like adrenaline and stuff like that. So let's kind of get into the nitty gritty of what I'm really talking about here instead of just talking in generalizations about stuff. So the role of sound design as it is now, again, is very supportive. And what I'm viewing it as is kind of more on equal ground with the front ensemble writing, the battery writing, the visual writing. And just like we're used to, everything has its place. We need to have good pacing in the show. It can't always be all visual, all front ensemble, all battery, all the time. We have to space things out, have a little bit of push and pull that's healthy and gives us a good, again, pacing through the whole program. Now, okay, so we're talking about electronics. Now, if we have an opener, for example, we're just starting to write the show, and and we have this concept. Say the concept is the color blue. Okay, so we're writing the opener. What's the opener? Okay, let's just introduce the vibe. Cool, maybe we'll have some narration on top of that, just to be a little more specific, so someone can latch on to something a little bit. So, the show's about blue. What comes to mind is, again, to me, personally, feeling. Not so much the color. But the color could certainly be represented visually to emphasize the music side of the program. So we have a lot of possibilities. Say, okay, we're thinking melancholy here. All right, so what does that sound like? We can interpret that into dynamics in the battery, kind of where we're playing the timbre. We could interpret that in the front ensemble for sure, harmonically, melodically. But we're very limited to what we have as a sound palette. Now, the first thing I kind of think about is not necessarily the music, but it's the visual. What do we have in the activity right now that we are accepting and is abstract? It's dance. Dance can be beautiful, it can be ugly, and it can be a really interesting way to explain how we feel and to display certain ideas. And I think it's more accepted because we can see it. We can see the performers' faces when they're really going after it, and we can kind of take in, like, okay, I can kind of feel the vibe. All right, it's blue, it's melancholy, you can see it. But what? Again, what does that sound like? And that's what's scary. If we're bringing up concepts in a design meeting and they're something like this, and we want to go beyond kind of the typical ideas of, oh, blue is sad. And we want to go deeper, or we're thinking, okay, more descriptive melancholy. It's really the job of the sound designer to, for example, in this case, writing this blue show, interpret the ideas that are kind of on the table and make something, maybe even just a little kind of cue that feels and sounds like melancholy, which is a skill. It's definitely not something that everyone can do, and it takes a lot of practice. A lot of taking in other ideas of what melancholy sounds like and then creating something new. And most importantly, exploring yourself and asking yourself, okay, have I felt melancholy before? What does that feel like to me? And at that point, you have a real jumping point to write something that at least comes from someone's authentic perception of what the concept means. And it's not necessarily always deriving itself from, things you hear. Maybe sometimes you have a different approach because you feel an emotion differently from everyone else, which is kind of how that stuff goes. We don't all have the same perception of the world, even if we're looking at the same things. And that just kind of goes upon the same idea that we don't all love this idea of abstract, or we don't all love when things are too straightforward. But kind of cycling back to this idea of songwriting, when people write a song and people are listening to it, say they have a good audience, they can smell it on you if you are not being true or being authentic. Because if you're trying to, use music as a way to console yourself, or, if you're sad, you want to listen to music, you wouldn't want to listen to something that's super manufactured, because it doesn't really allow you to truly explore what you're feeling. And it feels so much better to hear something that's authentic, because that allows you to feel a real person's feelings, and you can relate to that and relate that to your experience. Because, if you're looking at a show and you, for example, feel some kind of emotional response that is in relation to melancholy, like we were talking about, you might relate that back to your life. You might relate to what you're seeing to things you've experienced. And it's kind of this give and take energy that's happening. And when you're actually, coming into someone's life and making a positive, not even change, just a positive experience in the moment. And that's something that's very, very profound. And it has meaning to it, and it has purpose. When you go to a show, it's not just to do well, not just to get that score. It's really to connect with the crowd. And if that's the fundamental nature of your show, connecting with the crowd, that just gives this whole new road for the kids and the students and designers to explore. That's invisible, that we don't always take in terms of it being a path. And it can allow you to create something really cool. But, for some people, that emotional reaction is more so from the achievement of what's happening in front of them. Seeing people play extremely well. And I think we'd all be kidding ourselves if we don't like to see that. But again, there's just another level of achievement that's not necessarily the playing, but it's kind of the achievement of having the audience feel the concept that doesn't entirely relate just to the hands. And I don't think this is necessarily a new idea here. I think this is something that people have been trying to interpret into kind of WGI rules and stuff like that for a while. It's hard. How do you define something that's not tangible? And I think that's kind of really where the basis of the activity is kind of derived from. And it's really going to take, moving forward, people that are kind of really not caring too much about, what the score says and more about the artistic content. And I think you can certainly go way too far with that idea and make something that is totally horrible, just as you can make something totally horrible that is in the opposite direction. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of nuance. But we're kind of speaking more in a vacuum here, I guess I should say. But, when we look at groups like Broken City, they are doing this type of stuff. They're taking human experience-based shows, putting the crazy amount of achievement on top of them. And, they're not only just presenting these in the crowd split, kind of how I'm talking about. They are really bringing in everybody. And I think that's kind of the ultimate goal with this stuff. And it's great that we have them as an example right now. Mike Jackson and Kevin Shaw and all those guys down there to help bring things forward. Because it shows what can happen. And it's just one way that stuff can happen. People can be on that same level, but doing stuff in a whole other style. And, that's kind of where I want to see things go. Again, not so that it's like dominant and taking everything over, but because I think that's just another road that we need to go down. But moving on. Sorry, I tend to speak a little more philosophically than kind of more directly on this topic of sound design. But I think it's very important. I think, if we are going to even talk about what we can do with all these plugins and virtual instruments and stuff, we have to know the vision. So when you have all this endless amount of things you can do, if you don't have a plan, what are you doing? So when we have this idea of, okay, I'm writing an opener that needs to feel melancholic, you need to philosophically understand what that means to you and what you want it to mean for the performance and to the audience to even, choose your sounds. Because you're doing something just completely from scratch. If I'm working with a group and they're giving me maybe the front ensemble battery for a hit moment or something, I'm just going to take the vibe that's there and I'm going to try and make something that sounds, at least to me, really cool and would have a cool effect in that moment. If that's just an achievement-based spot there and there's kind of this just sound that's kind of happening that has a certain, again, vibe to it. Sorry, I say that a lot. I just want to fit inside there and then emphasize the moment. So the vision kind of, in that case, creates itself. But we're going from scratch, that decision from the vision, sorry, can allow us to just be like, okay, I want to use and start with these sounds, and you can jump from there. So to kind of be more frank about this, this process, so let's kind of revert back. All right, okay, we're writing this opener. What am I going to do? What do sound designers usually do? So for people that don't know, we have these programs called DAWs. Popular ones are called Pro Tools, Cubase, Logic. There's a lot of other ones as well. Ableton, all this stuff. Essentially, these are canvases. And on this canvas, we have a palette. And all of our colors are virtual instruments, which are essentially just computerized kind of sample libraries that sample pianos, weird affected sounds that are spread around so we can play them on a keyboard, or any kind of MIDI instrument that we have. And on top of that, we also have plugins like EQ, just you would have on a car stereo, just way more advanced, compression. And we have all these weird things like you might see on guitar pedals, if you're familiar, like phasers and flangers, and on amps too. That you can get really wild with, delay, reverb. And these are kind of the tools that are a little bit more involved with kind of the more legitimate definition of sound design. Like if you're thinking of Super Smash Bros. And all the crazy sounds in there, that's the type of stuff you might use to make some of those sounds and kind of get really everything from scratch. How people at Skywalker Sound were making, the lightsaber sounds for the first time, all that kind of stuff. So we have these tools, we have this palette, we have this canvas. So for me, if, I had a colleague that had a dance idea in mind, or maybe not even at all, and just had just general concept, I'll take this melancholy thing and I'll start brainstorming music. I'd probably pick source material and kind of go off of that and maybe even use that source material, but kind of revert back, maybe have that be later on and have something in the beginning that's kind of in the same mood. And for me, I really like the idea of making a program feel, I guess, like a movie. I know in DCI people have been throwing around, their production type thing, where it's kind of this whole, almost feeling more like a stage production. And that's where I really love the idea of narration, because we can not only bring in dance, abstract dance, new sounds, but we can also bring in poetry. We can have a voice actor that really brings that poetry to life and just adds to the nuance of the show and kind of just makes things a little more 3D, so to speak. So I can be like, okay, I want a poem that revolves around the word blue, and hopefully in the same context as we're looking for. And if we have that, that can also create ideas for staging. Maybe there's a character that is being represented just in the moment there, and maybe this is the backbone of the show as well, and we can come back to it at the end to wrap things up with a bow. So I'll kind of take all these elements, put them together, and at that point it can be somewhat of a cut tape, just combining everything. That way the visual stuff can happen, but we can also start to have a conversation about what's happening in the front ensemble. We don't have to keep everything the electronics. We take maybe the textural stuff, put that onto keyboard instruments that can be played on main stage in a computer by our synthesizer kids, and we can take the other elements that we don't want there that probably would feel better on real instruments, and put them there and start to orchestrate around that. And I think the best way to kind of think about this approach, at least for me, is that I don't necessarily see the synthesizers as part of the front ensemble, even though they're in the front ensemble. I kind of see them as, just like the battery's battery, front's the front, the synths are the synths. Sometimes we can have up to 4 kids doing electronics at one time. And they have all this equipment, they have speakers, they have a mixer, there's iPads involved, it's basically just this whole other thing. And when they're kind of in the front ensemble, just as something that can be skipped out on in the bigger picture, we kind of lose our connection with them. And when we have maybe a team that's around them, we kind of have a bit more needed separation so that we can give electronics the attention they need, and the students, and make sure they have a good experience, make sure all this crazy stuff is going well for them. And when we write for them, there's a lot of different stuff we can do. It's not just the harmonic, the melodic. We talk about the textural stuff that they can do. Some of my favorite films, even going back to Hereditary, Suspiria, and all that stuff. Also stuff like Arrival as well. we get into this territory where we can create a world. And, if you can get the crowd lost in a world, you can really get them roped in. And that's something that's also extremely difficult. But, when I saw, for example, Arrival for the first time, that soundtrack is no John Williams score, but is by one of my favorite composers, the late Johan Johansson. And he created basically kind of what we're talking about here. He created something for the unknown. If you don't know already, Arrival was a very critically acclaimed film. I can't remember what year. It might have been 2014, 15. I don't know. Around there. It could have been later. That was based on this kind of alien ship coming to different countries around the world. It's kind of like replicas of the same ship. And they are meeting these aliens for the first time and trying to communicate with them. And what Johan Johansson did was create the sound of the environment, created the sound of the aliens and their environment and how they spoke through sound design. And also music composition. If you go and listen to it, you won't hear typical things that you would think of when you think of film score. But he was serving the film, the visual, in such an interesting way that brought everything to life. And I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to say here. And the same thing with Hereditary. If you look at Hereditary, it is really just a commentary on a family dynamic in a really bad situation. And it's really more of a drama that brings in horror, as opposed to a horror movie that brings in drama. And the composer for that movie, his name's Colin Stetson. He's a saxophone player. That might not be the first thing you think about when you want someone to score your horror movie, but it was him, and he succeeded. The first shots of the movie are, showing you where they are, the kind of the house that they're in. There's a whole theme around the mom in the film building, as her job, kind of miniature houses and miniature work environments. And behind it are these crazy, just pitched down saxophones that I have never heard before. It was totally new, but it gave such an eerie, dark, ambiguous vibe to one of the craziest films I've ever seen, and one of my favorite films I've ever seen. I saw it when it opened the first night, alone, and I also went home alone after that as well. And that opening shot in the beginning of the music, I love so much that I came back the next night to see it again. And speaking of that, this is a great comparison I forgot to make earlier. The first day was with all the hardcore horror fans that came. It kind of makes you, or it kind of reminds you of The Exorcist. In reality, The Exorcist was kind of funny. There's some wild stuff that's said in that movie. Hereditary is similar in that way, how things come across at times. And I think everyone was terrified in the first viewing. And the second viewing I saw was kind of more the public, and people were laughing during parts of it. I thought that was funny. I forgot to say that earlier. And I really want to emphasize this because, a lot of us are looking at different things when we experience these films. And they're putting us in a place and we're kind of almost expecting them to put us in a place. And when that's done at a high level, to me, that's, it directly coincides with the achievement of the actors. But just when those two things come together, to me, it doubles up on just a performance with good acting. And for me, when I watch those films, I like them more than your typical drama, because they are just letting you experience the dread that is being presented in the movie in all ways possible, as opposed to more narrative-based dramas where it's kind of just based on, I guess, more real-life, tangible stuff. Even though it can still be very, very deep and very introspective. And I could talk about this all day, but I'll wrap this up like this. So we talk about how we want to define the undefinable in the rulebook. So I've been talking about WGI most of this time. It's a little bit easier to relate this stuff to WGI because it's a little more experimental than DCI. But DCI can relate as well, for sure. You know, it's hard to, even for me, explain what I mean when I want to explore environments, explore vibes, the untangible, when designing a show. And I think because I don't see a lot of that, I don't experience a lot of that as a viewer in WGI, I'm just so apt on exploring it. And I'm really excited that I'm not the only one. And for me and some of the people I work with, I think they can definitely vouch for this, is that we're not really fans of WGI, necessarily. You know, there's shows, I mean, me and my buddy Kevin love some of Ayala's stuff, Broken City we love, and some others, but we're really more interested in kind of the underdogs of the game, because we just think they're doing cooler stuff and we like it more. Even this past year in DCI, Mandarins, you know, speaking of the Ayala team, we're doing some crazy cool stuff. I personally love that show. And what's funny is that I think that's a really great example I didn't talk about, but when we saw that show in the Dome, they have some sections where the battery is playing crazy stuff like towards the corner, and I think they're playing True Colors at that point. And you know, it wasn't me that said it. I heard multiple other people say, before I even saw the show in the Dome, the day before, they were saying they were really creeped out by that moment. And I was so excited to see it the next day because I know exactly what they're talking about, and they weren't wrong. It was a well-achieved, uncomfortable moment that had purpose in the production, and to me, that is one of the most beautiful things that can happen as we move forward. So I'm gonna wrap this up here. Thanks for listening to my philosophical rambling. And we'll have some more stuff going on in the future. Got some cool stuff planned, so we'll have that out to you soon. I guess I'll see you later.
When you serve your purpose, I think you serve that purpose. You're in my